if they have backup generator on, they can at least breathe. Without it, they can't even breathe.
Or you can still also say though, like, you know, this patient is almost dead. They probably don't need like air, like ventilation. You just cut it off. If you're going for that.
I feel like if the backup generator is working and the National Guard or other rescuers showed up earlier than what when they show up, actually there will be a lot less casualties.
I think the second part of that statement is a big, well, both parts, but
I feel
yeah,
like the
somebody
government-
needed to come in and help, and
I
they
feel like
had
the government is
nothing.
not doing its job.
They had nothing.
You know, especially about that one part where they have police at the hospital, but then the police are like, oh, we have to get back at around 5 o'clock to prevent civil unrest in the city, and they left. Yes, so it's a tragedy.
All right, nice job, guys. Is group 3 ready to go?
I don't know. They mentioned all the points already.
That's why I'm hiding. Can we like use yours? Yeah. Hi, I'm Kim.
Hi, Kim.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Kim, and I'm
I'm a drunk addict.
Hi, I'm Kim, and I have a problem with legal issues.
Okay, hello class. Well, my name is Neil. And we're going to talk about like the legal issue of treatment. And I have my colleagues here. They're going to introduce themselves.
I'm Kim. I'm Lindsay. I'm Jane. What's up? And we are. So, a little background about this event. Obviously, this happened with Hurricane Katrina. And the investigation started in July 2006. And the doctor was charged with second-degree murder. But as you guys learned from the previous presentations, she didn't have to go to jail for that. But we're going to dive into that a little bit more and dissect this issue in a legal way.
So what were the charges and why? As the previous slide had stated that she was charged with second-degree murder charges. The doctor was charged because she quickened the death of the individuals during the Hurricane Katrina. Also known with the lethal injection, as we've been talking about. And so much of quicken because they were dying. So instead of them sitting there in pain, she helped that go a little faster. She unlawfully allowed patients to die without care because of her own thoughts and beliefs. So informed consent was not obtained by those patients. Some patients were not competent and capable of understanding what was happening due to conditions that the natural disaster caused, and some patients were not fully informed with their decision making. What do you guys think about that? That she unlawfully allowed patients to die without care.
Was it justified? You guys are shaking your heads, so you guys have an opinion.
I like the term quickened because how many of those people were going to die anyway? So yeah, I think I think what happened with the staff, depending on what side of the argument you're on, they all acted according to their beliefs.
But wouldn't that be playing God?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely,
We're gonna get to that.
absolutely. But at that point, God wasn't playing fair.
God is just being God. There's no fair. God doesn't play by our rules.
Right, right. But I mean, what did they have? You know, I mean, they were thrust into this mess.
Okay, so can this affect or influence the practice of nursing in the future? What do you guys think? Can this natural disaster, can this affect how nurses act? Can it influence how future natural disasters will be taken care of?
Yeah, I think as Dr. Poppy said, like, this is a huge learning experience for the whole country.
Yes, there's been a number of protocols put in place and a lot of facilities preparing for the worst.
Okay, so just a follow-up question to this. So, comparing like the incident that happened like in the Katrina, the things that happened in the Katrina like incident, like what are the differences? Like what did we learn now? How is the practice now different from how it was in that incident? So with the incident and how like the doctors and like the nurses acted at that point, if that was to happen today, how would the nurses and doctors now react to this to the incident?
How are we better prepared now? You have to think about it.
I don't understand the question. I just really don't think we know.
I would go one step further and ask how, based on the history that we have now with Katrina and what we were supposed to have learned from that, if a similar situation happened tomorrow, would you expect the same outcome? And
Probably.
if you did not, why not?
Well, Amanda, why did you say probably?
Well, because, like, you can prepare yourself as long as you want for anything, but as soon as you lose power and you have to make decisions and play gods because you can't evacuate your whole hospital, like, how are you going to choose who gets what and who gets to evacuate and who has to stay? And, I mean, I really don't think that they would, like, give lethal injections again, or, like, if it's either giving a lethal injection or it's like leaving them there to die and starve.
So if I get you correctly, you're saying that nothing has changed.
I'm not saying nothing has changed. We've seen the history and we've seen what happens, but like I said, you can prepare for so long, but as soon as you lose power and as soon as like you're in survival mode and there's nothing else for you to do, like what happens then? You can't just sit around and
Right.
be like, oh, feel sorry for myself because we prepared and it's not working.
Your
Yeah.
adrenaline kicks in and really you don't think, you just do.
Dan?
Yeah, kind of really assigning with Amanda. I don't think it would happen in the same fashion, but quite similar. I mean, as stats show us that we're still, the patient to nursing ratio is still bad. You know, we would still be overworked, understaffed.
Not to mention in a crisis, not everyone comes out, right?
Right.
I mean, it's multiplied to the nth degree because you've got people coming in there seeking shelter that aren't even patients. They're just, you're being bombarded by the general public that are trying to get out of harm's way. And you're left with the staff that was able to get there or remained there from the previous shift or whatever.
It could be a skeleton crew.
It
fed on
could
shift.
be, it could be next to nothing, yes, yeah. I would be curious as to if something similar happened tomorrow, would there be the same judgment on those healthcare providers as there was in this case? Prosecution, legal prosecution or not, would they be looked at the way they were?
I feel like if you're not in a situation, you don't know what they had to go through to get to that point. Like, oh, you can say, oh, you're.
You're very smart. We're gonna move on.
Alright, so, and we put a few, like, how this can affect and how this can influence. So, this natural disaster can affect it because it can lead the people to not trust the health professionals. It can make fear of doctors violating their patients' rights. It can affect communication between patients and health providers because they may not tell you everything. And then informed consent in disasters could lead to trust issues toward the health professionals again. And then it can also influence the care for today if it were to happen, because nurses can learn from the approaches that were used during Hurricane Katrina, and medical professionals can also learn what not to do.
That's Dr. Powell, isn't it?
She looks like you.
Like me?
Yeah.
Huh. Do I have that sour pout on my face all the time? Do I have that sour pout on my face all the time?
No.
Oh.
I see it.
Huh. Okay. Miracle, quit laughing.
Okay, there are many resources that defended the doctors, as Amanda was saying that there was a lot going on and the government didn't know. They are not put in that situation, so they can prepare as much as they can, but when they're put in that situation, they might have done the same exact thing as Powell did. Like, we don't really know that, and they weren't put in that situation, that life or death situation, that that they can make that like judgment call that they had to make. And it was like the medical professionals had to act fast, and they didn't really have much time to think. Because like you said, they lost power, they were running out of resources, they had to start evacuating people immediately so that they could limit the casualties, kind of thing. The doctors were only doing what they thought was best because of the lack of resources and the lack of communication they had outside the hospital. There was the Good Samaritan law that gives legal protection to people who give reasonable assistance to those who are, or who they believe to be injured, ill, or incapacitated. Powell was under the belief that she was saving the incapacitated patients and was giving them a quick, quiet death instead of a long, slow, and painful death that could have occurred because of them not having the right resources and the damage that the hurricane had done. And since they had a lack of resources and the machines were shutting off, Powell used euthanasia, which is defined as painlessly putting to death a person suffering. She believed what she was doing was putting the incapacitated patients out of their misery, and there was no other alternative motive besides the doctor doing what she thought was best for the patient. With this devastating circumstances, Powell believed she upheld her duty to the patients as a medical professional. Now my question is, how would you organize who got to be evacuated first?
Anybody that relied on power.
Okay, so correct me if I'm wrong, like, didn't they evacuate the people who were healthier first?
Yes.
See, when I read that, I was so confused, because wouldn't you think that you would evacuate people? Yeah. Like, I was
We kind of
How are they
back
gonna
and
get them
forth
out
on
though?
this.
I mean, you could have the patients that are
Where are we
you know,
gonna
you
take
can't
them?
use your resources.
Where are we
kinda
gonna
went
take
back
'em?
We kind of went back and forth on this because, so do you evacuate the people that have a better life expectancy, or do you evacuate the very sick that don't have much of a life expectancy?
In my opinion, I said that since they had limited resources, it was like, to me, it made more sense to evacuate the sick first, because if they needed more medical resources, they could evacuate them and get them to a different hospital so they can be treated, like, better. And the people that are healthy, they can get up and move, they can walk up and down the stairs, so when they lost power, instead of having to carry the patients that were not able to move up and down the stairs, like, they didn't have to do that, they just had the patients can walk down the stairs like themselves if they were, healthy, yeah, thank you. And stuff like that, so instead, I feel like instead of waiting until the end, after they're exhausted and tired and stuff like that, they should have just taken the patients that needed assistance and needed to be moved out first, so that they had less to worry about later with the limited resources and like carrying them up and down the stairs and stuff like that.
I would disagree with that.
Okay.
A couple reasons. The sickest, to evacuate the sickest first, they had to have somewhere to take them. There wasn't anybody getting out of there for days. So by letting the walkie-talkies go first, that helped save on resources. Plus, they let the people go that they had a good chance of survival. So they could go out and pretty much fend for themselves, right? So that freed up staff, it freed up resources. I don't know, I guess that's my reasoning for that.
Yeah.
I don't think they could have gotten
So when they
anybody
did
out
get
of there.
evacuated, where did they take them? Like, because they
The
said-
walkie-talkies?
Yeah.
They just turned them loose.
Oh, they just let
Yeah.
them go.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought they were like,
I mean, sometimes
Set.
there was boats coming down
yeah, that's what I was
through,
thinking.
and sometimes they, help them get into boats, and other times they would just, if they were able to get out into the street before the water was too deep, they just let them go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This kind of reminds me, obviously, to a less severe extent, but when you're in the hospital and if you, when you learn about like fire safety and if there's a fire in the hospital, you're going to evacuate those that are ambulatory first, then you're going to get those that you can get in wheelchair, then those who you can take down in bed, and then last you're going to take those who are relying on medical equipment. It reminds me of that, but obviously
And I
they
think,
have a place to go.
and I think the reason behind that is because you can save the
Yeah.
most the fastest.
Exactly.
That way.
Yeah.
So by everybody that can move, let's go, and then we at least get that many out, and then we start working on the more severe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amanda, I think that's an interesting solution you have, to have those who are able-bodied help bring out the sicker ones. I wonder if they saw that. It's
No, like,
an interesting
because
idea.
If you're just sending them out,
Yeah.
like, then you're not providing resources to them. So just cut the resources unless they absolutely need them and have them help you.
Yeah. I wonder if I was, a able-bodied nurse who was a patient at the time, and they said, "Oh, we're gonna get you out of here." I'm thinking, well, hell, am I running for my life, or am I staying here? Be like, "Oh, I'm a nurse. I can help. Let me help bring people up." It was just a interesting thought that you sparked in my mind.
Alright, this is the FEMA response to Hurricane Katrina. FEMA is a federal emergency management agency. They are the government entity that is charged with guiding the federal response to the nation's disasters, both natural and man-made. FEMA delayed federal response to Hurricane Katrina, and President Bush stated that it was not acceptable, and FEMA's preparedness for the natural disaster was questioned. It was also stated that the preparation for hazards focused on too much on terrorism and not so much for natural disasters. They had 31 of the 39 first responder departments that agreed that the training was adequate for terrorist attacks and not natural disasters. They admitted to the delayed response to the natural disaster, and because of this, it led to the doctors to make challenging decisions. There wasn't much communication between the hospital and the government, and the hospital was essentially left in the dark. What would you do in the medical profession's position if you were just thrown it, like you were in there when the hurricane hit? Like, what would you do personally?
You don't know.
best you can go from either view that you see fit.
There's a lot of answers that can come out of this right now.
It's a really broad
Yeah, I'm like trying to like.
Just ask something, just say
Yeah,
something.
There's a hurricane right now.
For the
We're in
love of
hospital.
God.
What would you do? Yeah.
Would you run? Would you stay?
If I was an able patient, I would definitely see where I could help.
So like, I feel like I would try to get as many preventative measures out of the way as soon as possible. Like when we still have power, I try to get as many patients like on the same floor and the same place as possible. So you, like later down the road, you don't have to move them. You won't have to run room to room to room. So like put them all in the lobby or something like that. And then like, I mean like as much as it violates HIPAA, you would have to organize them in some sort of fashion. Like put all the similar patients that require the same attention in one room, put all the other patients in this room, put all the not unconscious patients in this room and stuff like that. Just so like you have a system and you like if something's going wrong, you can tell what's happening. So you don't have to like go all the way up the stairs and go this way to find this patient who might be having a seizure or something like that. So you just have to be organized.
So you would know better. Anyone else?
I think one of the other detriments to that whole process was, it seemed to me when I was reading, it tended to get confusing sometimes, like you would read so-and-so did this and you're like, well, who's that again? And you have to go back. But it seemed to me like somebody else was pronouncing themselves in charge every day. There was somebody new that they had to take orders from. You know, that Life Care Hospital, I forget if they were part of Memorial, were they the parent of Memorial or Memorial was the parent of them? And so there were like two CEOs or two chief medical officers, and this guy's making the call and that guy's making the call, and then the government's calling, and then the mayor orders this mandatory evacuation, and I mean, it's like, who's in charge here? Who am I supposed to take orders from? You know?
Yeah.
So I think that complicated things a lot too.
You make a good point. Probably when it all happened, to figure out whatever staff was there, ranking system, who is in charge, and then so forth.
Alright, so after defending the doctor, you know, and all that good stuff, let's try to see what legal issues were violated. So, to your knowledge, list off some of the legal issues that were involved in this case and which ones were violated that you guys know of. HIPAA. That's a good one. But there are a couple more. You guys know this. That's the same thing, but it's still good.
Why thought you were asking me? I was like, I just said that.
Patient Self-Determination Act.
That's good.
Yeah, that's it. That's
I'm just trying to think of.
Nice.
Alright. There's a couple more. If you guys can think of them. But try to not defend the doctor. Defend the law. If you're a nurse, what civil laws did you know got violated? Yes, Roy.
actual laws, like not as a
Do you guys want me to clarify it?
like
go
non-medical ones.
Okay, well, I'll clarify it for you, that's no problem. So, what I'm trying to say is, from what we've learned in our classes, what do we know that has gone against like the legal issues that we have learned in our class? So like, there were a couple laws that we learned about, so which one of those that you guys do know of got violated? Because that has to do with nursing. There you go. So it's kind of like in the same line of what they're saying. So we're gonna move on. Okay. Anyways, legal issues. So like, the civil law is a really big umbrella term for all of this, and so is the statutory law, which has assault, battery, and, as Roy said, the Patient Rights Act. So, civil law, the point of that is to protect the rights of the people. But they didn't really do that because they didn't give them a voice. And then also, we were talking about playing God in this situation. So, of course, in an emergency situation, there is not really time for informed consent, but that doesn't mean we make that up or we determine where people where people's lifespans are. So one of the patients that was overweight, he said that only God knows when you die. If you have a pulse, you deserve to live. So that's what the patient said. It is not up to medical providers at times to determine if people are able to die if they're still conscious. So it's just not fair. And then, of course, as we heard from the previous presentations, HIPAA was violated, both having everyone in the lobby and triaging them. So that is another law that was violated.
How is having everyone in the lobby and triaging them violated?
Violating HIPAA?
Yeah.
Well, everyone in that room has a DNR, or they have the numbers on them. So, you will know, how people are categorized, and, who might not get treated first. So, in a way, that is having their privacy violated. So,
But that's how you triage.
that is, but think of it from a patient's perspective. We're trying to, as a job as a nurse, is to advocate and protect our patient. Are we protecting our patient when we're violating their privacy?
And why wasn't any nurse or doctors being charged with HIPAA violation?
That's a good question.
See, if they were not charged, then I can't say that. Then I think your argument still don't make sense.
Well, the thing is, no, I think what happened
Because
was,
if it actually didn't take place, then I would assume people would press charges. Or if people weren't pressing charges, the government or the state board of nursing would press charges against the nurses, and the medical board would press charges against the doctors.
Okay, so if you actually, I don't believe you actually read the article. There was an incident where the nurses were actually talking to each other in the hallway, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're not gonna back away from this set of people," and one of the patient's daughter actually heard about that going on. So that's an example of HIPAA violation, because they actually narrowed it down, and the patient's family heard about that, and she knew her mom was part of this people that would be back away. Does that make sense? So yeah.
yeah, why they didn't go forth and press charges for HIPAA is probably because they saw the second-degree murder as being something more important at that point. But why we can't say they charged for HIPAA, we weren't there. But, Amanda.
But, you have your stances of practice and your scope of practice for nursing, but that's for taking care of patients in a normal everyday thing. Honestly, we need something set in place for disasters. Scopes and standards of practice for disasters and stuff like that. So nurses and doctors and everybody like that, healthcare professionals, can't be charged with HIPAA because you're trying to save people's lives. It gets to the point where you can't keep privacy because you're focusing on trying to save somebody's lives.
But no matter what, someone's gonna bitch and complain about it, and they're gonna try to, get money out of it some way.
Yeah, but if you have laws in place
But
that
they're still
like
gonna
Samaritan
try.
law that protects
So
them,
what kind of law do you think can or will be implemented to prevent?
What do you think is gonna override it?
The Hospital and Disaster Act?
What's that?
What does it sound like they're doing such a big job?
What? No,
Like-
I'm just making it up.
I understand what you guys are trying to say, like disaster repair or Good Samaritan law or something like that. But I those are such a gray area, though. You can still rent.
Someone's gonna try to justify it no matter what. If there's a law on it, if there's a standard on it, it doesn't matter. Someone's going to try to make